is in our village and in our community. And whether we like it or not, everyone is involved in it directly or indirectly. We know someone who's secretly involved in it or openly involved in homosexuality. It's involved in our socializing process in school, on our job, and our social activities, so we must gather some understanding of it and how to cope with it, and how to further help those who may want to stop being homosexual and detox from it, and what sort of assistance they need in their path to cope with it. There's also a bit of gender confusion that adds to the homosexuality in our communities. That is, the textbooks that express homosexual themes, the music that express homosexual overtones. It impacts our children as well as the teens. Now, some people are homosexual part-time, some people are homosexual full-time. Most of the homosexuals are married, and most of the homosexuals in our community are women, or there's an equal amount of men as well as women. We are in a condition of being dominated by another culture, and now social behavior and restrictions are controlled by another culture. So we're basically under cultural stressor. And homosexuality is one of those stresses. We are stressed as parents. We are parenting challenge. We are melanin challenge. Therefore, we attempt to be parents and we attempt to use our melanin. And we are challenged by homosexuality as well. I'm saying challenged because in order for a culture to be free to use the political and social institution known as sex, they must be free and have life and liberty to use and exercise their culture in all places, at all times, and in all situations. And if you don't have that, then your culture is stressed and under control of someone else who defines how and when you can use your culture. We are dominated, and we are under white supremacy, or some people associate that with the side effect of white supremacy known as white racism, which is basically something used to protect the supremacy position of some white people. I said that sex is political and social. It is a political and social system that speaks to a culture and allows the culture to speak to itself and solve its problems. But in order to practice sex in your culture, you must be first free in your culture to exercise your culture in education, to devise your own curriculums, pick your own teachers, pick your own standards for certifying professionals, be they in medicine or be they in mathematics or be they in architecture. If you are not able to exercise that right as a culture, then you are culturally suppressed. Your culture is being challenged and you're under a stressor. And the language of sex is being dictated to African people. And we only know of sex through the European sexual system, which is political and social, which, if you follow it, causes white people to always be in control. Our minds, our taste buds, our way we see, the way we hear, is all interpreted by your brain. And if your brain is conditioned by another culture, then you see, you hear, and you taste according to that culture. Because sex is a political and social institution. The word sex is not actually a medical word. It's basically a political and social word. Just as nutrition is a political and social word, health, as well as what we call disease. And of course, nature is a political and social word. So if you pursue the Europeans' idea of nature, you would say that a man and a woman who are naked and sleep together and they're adults, they will eventually have sex. Or a naked man and another naked man who sleep together will eventually have sex. Or a naked woman and another naked woman who sleeps together will eventually get into some sort of sexual activity. And you would say that is in the nature of man or in the nature of woman. But that is a term that we use that is nature, but the word itself is a political and social word. So if you pursued the Europeans' idea of nature, you're pursuing European culture. If you pursue the European idea of sex, you're pursuing European culture. We know from our ancestors, the Anu people or Twa people, naked men and women sleep together, skin to skin, because they don't have blankets. They have no need to use blankets, and no incest occurs, and no homosexuality occurs, and no adultery occurs, because sex is defined by the culture. So we're just assuming that we are following the nature of man and the nature of woman, and therefore homosexuality is part of the nature of man and woman. is a part of the nature as defined by the culture which dominates us, and that's European culture. Homosexuality is not normal in African culture. However, it is normal for Europeans, but it is not normal for Africans. So whether we like that or not, we have to address that issue. And the only way to understand that fully is to be free to practice your culture at all places, at all times, in all situations, which we do not have as African people. So we have to start seeing each other sexually as African people. But what we're doing now is seeing and looking at each other as if we are white. We look at each other's behinds, which comes out of homosexuality of European culture. Instead of looking at the spirituality of each other, we look at the physicality of each other. We look at the mechanisms, the parts of our body which we think are good for breeding, because we still look at each other as if we're slaves, trained to breed with each other instead of trained to politicize and socialize and utilize each other's ma'at and glory to the highest height. But we look at it as a sexual thing. So we understand that our sex is being controlled by white people, and therefore we don't really have sex. What we do is molest each other. Or we have petty rape. And we call this molestation, sexual molestation or petty rape, sex. But our sex is not from African culture, it's from European culture, and therefore we approach each other as Europeans. Now, when we get into homosexuality, we actually get into a fragment of sex. As you know, heterosexual people, I'm talking about a man and a woman, who have sex. We have a fragment, some people practice this fragment of sex known as oral sex. Now, the homosexuals take that fragment of heterosexual sexuality and call the oral sex itself sexuality, when actually it's just a fragment of the whole sexual ritual. It's sort of like you calling the tire that goes to a car, the car. It's sort of like in the instance of, for instance, ascorbic acid, which we call vitamin C. It is actually a fragment of vitamin C, but it's called vitamin C. We have a mineral like calcium carbonate, which we call calcium, but actually it's a fragment of the calciums, because there's over 12 calciums, but you can't take one of them and call it the whole. You can't take the tire and call it the car. You can't take the fragment of heterosexual man and woman sex and call that sexuality. It's simply a fragment of heterosexual man and woman sexuality, which is called homosexuality. Understand this, that a man and a woman biologically can have sex. A man and a man can only masturbate. A woman and a woman can only masturbate. To have biologically sexual intercourse, you have to have a man and a woman. Those are only two people that can have sex. So actually the term homosexuality is a misnomer. It should be homo-masturbating or anti-sexuality, but it's not a form of sexuality, even though we're going to use that term to help us further get an understanding of the subject. Now understand that the human being is limited. We have limitations. We cannot evolve past what's already present in us. We have something that's called a gene pool, which Mother Nature draws from, that mixes around in order to help us get over circumstances or develop a form of thinking that we need, a form of behavior we need. Mother Nature draws from this gene pool. And the presence of this genes, of these other genes, doesn't mean the presence of homosexuality. What I'm trying to say is, if you're looking at sex from a European perspective, for instance, you look at, we're looking at homosexuality, mind you, but you look at, for instance, like a person that has a gun. You have a gun in your house, and so you assume that since the person has a gun in their house, that means they have been robbed. This is the European perspective. They look at antibodies, for example. So they say, since you have an antibody, therefore you have AIDS. You follow me? Since you have a gun in your house for defense of your house, that means you have been robbed, if we're looking at it from a European perspective. Since you have an antibody in your body for defense, that means you have AIDS. And that's what essentially the AIDS test is. It's another way of fragmentizing our thinking so we won't be divided, so we won't look at ourselves holistically from an African perspective. So we have these limitations. Your hand has a limitation, can be but so big and so small. It was created with the limitation in it, and your sexuality is created with a limitation in it. And to perform these anti-sexual activities or the homo-masturbating is not to perform sexuality. It's just a European way of confusing us and molesting us in our predicament of being dominated by them. As we're being dominated or molested by the symbols of European culture, which leads us into sexual excitation. We have such thing as the ponytail or the pigtail, and the tail it physically is attached to the behinds, and that leads us back to this homosexuality themes again, where we get into patting each other on the behinds in sports events, which comes out of the homosexual cult, where we get the term lesbian, which comes from Lesbo Island, where the European women used to practice homosexuality. So we have all these themes that force sex at us and force the European ideations or ideas of what sex is all about. We have all the circle symbols that symbolize the vagina. We have donuts that are round, that ooze out this white cream, which symbolizes semen. We have the symbols of penises in the candy bars, such as the penis symbol of a Babe Ruth bar, which is attached to a man named Babe Ruth, and we eat these Babe Ruths with nuts on it. We get all the symbols at it. The Three Musketeers shaped like a penis. We say such things as sometimes I feel like a nut, sometimes I don't. We use all these sexual symbolism. The hot dog, which is symbolic of the penis, and all these round circular forms like the pizzas and the Cheerios. All this symbolism that comes at it is creating a political and social system known as sexuality. So in other words, we begin to adopt those themes from another culture where the highest form of femininity is masculinity and the highest form of masculinity is femininity. This causes us to bend and alter our own selves in order to fit into European culture, to be normal. And we enter all this unisexual clothing, the women with zippers in the front of their pants and they don't have a penis, the bikini underwear worn by men and women, the unisex haircuts, the earrings, the nose rings, the unisexuality of that, the unisexuality of violence where men and women in these games that children play are beating up on each other, there's black on black crime themes, the one woman dominating a man in combat, these kind of themes that express homosexuality, the unisex of the playgrounds. And of course physically we can examine this in the eyes around 11 o'clock. If there's a long line in the iris, that's indication of some kind of homosexual stressor in the person. Or we change the diet of a gorilla who's a vegetarian and put them on a meat-eating diet and get involved in homosexual behavior. Or we raise the hormone level in our diet in the beef and the chicken and the milk. That causes the women, the young girls to develop breasts at an early age, and it causes a lot of sexual excitation of that system and causes confusion basically. And we get all of these kind of sexual themes in the nursery rhymes. And what happens is a person, especially a person who's under European domination, begins to find another outlet for self-hatred. The African person hates their culture for not supporting them, protecting them, and being military enough to attack their enemy. And so in order to further that hate, the homosexuality themes are used in order for a person to hate their self, hate their culture, hate their race, hate their mother, their father, and sublimely get protection by getting into these mixed relationships where white and black homosexual are in a relationship together. The black homosexual, of course, is using the white person as a mistress or a master in a way of kind of protecting themselves from their own hatred and own need to be oppressed. Sublimely, this is homosexual is used in a deviant way, aside from the fact that it's something abnormal for African people. And homosexual, a black homosexual can pretend to be free in a homosexual relationship. For some kind of reason, sublimely, they can get away from the domination and hide with a white person in a sexual union, and that way they can pretend that they're free. So we're using it as an escape, we're using it as a medication, and we're using it most of all to bend and alter our culture. Remember, it's not normal for African people, but it's normal for Europeans, because you have to ask yourself certain questions. Who benefits from homosexuality? How is it that you, watching someone who's involved in homosexuality, benefits you? How does it benefit the person who is practicing homosexuality? How does it serve African culture? How does it serve European culture? Who ultimately reaps the benefit from homosexuality? What culture does? These are the questions we have to ask. We have to ask, why is it that we are only free to practice homosexuality when we're not free to practice our culture in all situations, at all times, and in all places, but the homosexuality we're allowed to practice? Some of us get rather confused and think that homosexual rape occurs in jail, but we have to understand that homosexual rape is brought into jail by people. The people bring the homosexual rape in, they bring the theft in, stealing from each other, they bring the masturbation in, they bring in the murder, they bring in the sports. All of that's brought into the prisons. So homosexual rape occurs in the general population. It's not just in the prison. I want that to be clear. It's part of all of our social functions. We cannot escape it. It's part of Islam, the Yoruba, Judaism, Christianity, atheism, voodoo, Kemet. It's a part of all of us in all our social aspects because it's part of the molestation of African people. We are therefore, since we can't practice our culture in all places, at all times, in all situations, we are culturally dysfunctional. And this homosexuality is just an aspect of that dysfunctionality. We have to militarily protect our culture and defend our culture against our enemies. We always had military defense in all African societies. All the religious or spiritual systems in Africa had a military. Now we have no military, so we have no way of protecting our children from being molested by cocaine, by crack, by Ritalin. We have no way to protect ourselves except by going to a white court, which means we are under cultural stressor. We have leaders who do not have a military to protect us or defend us or attack our enemies, so our leaders are basically opinion givers. They are not leaders. They are dysfunctional. We have dysfunctional leaders, a dysfunctional culture. An expression of that dysfunction is a political and social system known as homosexuality. It's a sign and symptom of being dominated by white people, by racism, and by white supremacy. Now, we're going to go into some of these charts here so you can get a better understanding of what's manifesting itself as so-called homosexuality in our culture. Now, sex addiction is the main thing. If you're constantly thinking about sex stimulation or sexual fantasies, or you're unable to stop sex thoughts or use words or jokes or slang words about sex, then you more than likely have a sex addiction. If you have sex when you're not aroused or constantly looking at your own or other people's sex organs or thighs or breasts or behind, remember we look at the breast because of the cleavage. The part in the breast reminds us of the part in the behind. That comes out of the homosexual cult. That's why the breasts are a sex item. Not because they are sexual, it's because they come from the sexual symbolism of the behind, which is associated with homosexuality coming out of the Greeks and Roman cult. Now, sex, the other reason why we're into sex is because we are addicted by the hatred. We hate ourselves, so we use sex to medicate the hatred. We medicate or hide our stress and self-hatred through sex. If we feel bad, we have sex. If we call a nigger, we have sex. We use it to soothe white racism or the slavery trauma. Uses of sex for power, control, and ownership become sex and slave master. We have power over someone by being the man in a relationship, especially in a lesbian relationship or in a male relationship where you have a man and a woman pretending to be of those genders. If you have a series of unsuccessful relationships, male to male, mother to daughter, female to male, friend, that also is a sign and symptom of why you're having so much sex. Sexual attachment, this addiction to constantly having sex. If you lack self-identity, which means you must identify yourself by your race, because your race defines you as a self. You go on these sex binges, where you just have a lot of sex one month, none the next month, and a month after that you get into abstinence, or you start masturbating. These are signs and symptoms of sex addiction. Or you like videos that have themes about sex, or sex songs, or books about sex, sexual relationships, or male and female conflict type themes. You like adultery and misguided love, so you get addicted to soap operas. Or you use religions or prophet or minister or social cause to hide from your sexual problems and your sexual addiction. Can be at risk for sexual addiction if you socialize or work with homosexuals or same-sex masturbators. That is part of sex addiction. You can develop the symptoms or disease if you're close to a person or friend or relatives who are homosexual. In other words, that puts you at risk. And if you believe in the European sex drive myth, you're trying to satisfy that all the time, and that can lead to sexual addiction. Further, let's look at where we're getting all of these sexual themes, why I keep calling it European. Now, we have the glamour king, Louis XIV. He loved long wigs. He's nylons with the garter, the high heels, the little dress, the ruffles, the lace. All this was a fashion of white men from 1643 to 715. He made this very popular in European culture, especially the high heels. So now you see that this is the dress of men. The highest form of male sexuality was homosexuality. So the white women in due course began to take on the outfit of dress like men. In fact, dress like homosexuals in order to make themselves appealing to their homosexual mate. So today, white women dress up as homosexuals. And this is why they are attracted to the white man. Now, let's look at homosexual addiction, the steps here. Homosexual addiction, steps in treatment. Remember, we as African people look at this as an abnormality. This is not a part of African culture. First, you have to bond to Ma'at, to African culture, and natural foods. The tendency with junk foods is to cause a high acid level and cause excitation of the sexual organs. The second thing you do is confront the issues of sexual abuse of others, rape, or incest. A lot of us are involved in sexual abuse, and we hide from that in homosexuality. We get abused or raped by our father, or our mothers, or our uncles, or our cousins, and this, of course, can lead to homosexuality. Identify activities, feelings, and thoughts that trigger homosexual feelings and sex activities. Now, if you're going to go in treatment for homosexuality, you must know those things that trigger your desire to have homosexual activities with someone else. The movies may do it, certain songs, certain activities, violence may do it. So you stay away from those things that trigger or arouse you homosexually. Then you should confront the emotional and spiritual issues concerning sperm abortion, child abortion, infertility, fibroids, and prostate disease. We have a lot of abortions of sperm where the men ejaculate and put the sperm in a rubber and toss it in the trash or toilet. That causes spiritual suicide. The same effect that occurs with women who have abortion of fetus. Then we're suppressing the anger in our sex organs, which leads to infertility, fibroids, and prostate disease. It's a spiritual illness which manifests itself as a mental illness which causes a physical illness and contributes to fibroids and prostate disease. We have to heal the relationship with ourselves, our family, our friends, and our culture. Remember, we have a diseased relationship, a dysfunctional relationship, anytime you cannot practice your culture at all times, in all situations, in all places. You're not free to practice the social and political system of African sexuality. So we have to heal that relationship. We have to bond back with ourselves, our family, and our friends. So we design a method to change the negatives to positives. We have to have a plan, or else we plan to fail. Then we have to have a way to evaluate the achievements. And then when we have done successful with these, we have to have rewards. And if you don't make it, fulfill those obligations in your treatment, then you have to have punishments. Rewards and punishments is how you control children and control your culture and civilization. Now we're down to follow the treatment schedule, the goals, and understand that you may have periods of time where you relapse into homosexuality again, or want to be around homosexual people or talk to them casually. So you have to be aware when you're relapsing and know you have to get back with the group that you're in, the male group or female group, or talk back to your mentor. Stay in constant contact with a mentor. That's an advisor or a detox homosexual, study group, female-male relationship group. You have to stay in constant contact with that in order to firm your culture, because your culture is what's going to heal you. There is no answer for this treatment in European culture. European culture itself will lead you back to homosexuality. Now, homosexual treatment detox, detoxification, the psychosocial treatment, abstinence. When you're detoxing from homosexuality or helping someone to detox from homosexuality, you should understand that abstinence from heterosexual and or homosexual intercourse is imperative. Because we have a lot of confusion as to what is heterosexual foreplay. What is the foreplay between a man and a woman as opposed between a man and a woman and a woman? So we have to abstain from that, so we redefine foreplay. That's petting, kissing, caressing. That has to be redefined. We have to cleanse ourselves from the homosexual impulses. Abstinence from sexual-related dancing, movies, and songs. We have to stay away from that because once we're stimulated sexually, we may tend to go back to homosexuality. So in the detox treatment, we stay away from all of that for a prescribed period of time. Participation in African spirituality groups, women's groups, men's groups, cultural groups, or study groups. Something to reaffirm our African culture, because the culture answers our questions, solves our problems. Without the culture, we have no solution to this problem. The mentor or sponsor, you have to talk with them daily. The mentor must have empathy and or have detox from homosexuality. Your mentor should be empathetic, should have an ear, should listen to you and help you derive an answer to your problems or your misguided feelings or your confusion spasms you may have within yourself. You must have positive support from your family or peers. If you don't have that, you're going to have difficulty solving this problem or dealing with it or understanding it. Abstinence from socializing or activities with active homosexuals. That's the same with even for alcoholic. If you're alcoholic, you don't go to bars. You don't go around a place where there's a whole lot of drinking. If you're homosexual, you don't go around a place where there's a whole lot of homosexual activities or homosexuals. Get involved in meditation or Egyptian yoga. Abstinence from sexual-related words and clothes. You don't want to dress up like a whore if you're trying to stop being a whore. If you're trying to stop being a homosexual, you get away from those unisexual clothes and start wearing clothes that are gender-specific. Now we have the homosexual treatment, detoxification. Again, this is things you should be aware of if you're dealing with a child who may have some gender confusion, a little boy or a little girl who has gender problems, and you want to get them thoroughly bonded to their own sexuality. We have supplements to help. This treatment detoxification, that's no junk foods, alcohol, or drugs. These things may tend to cause a person to lose their behavior, especially white sugar causes depression. And this depression may cause a person to feel sad or trigger self-hatred, which leads back to homosexuality. So we have to get away from this white sugar. Alcohol causes a person to lose control of their emotions, as well as the drugs, especially the drug after effects. So we have to abstain from that. Supplements we use in homosexual treatment and detoxification are vanadium and chromium to stop the sugar craving, manganese to repair and strengthen the reproductive system, phenylalanine to work with the depression and the craving that people have for sex, serotonin to help a person have enough energy and also to help them with their craving as well as tyrosine, pumpkin seed oil, which helps the nervous system transmit messages, is also good for the prostate, and even primrose, which is also good for the reproductive organs and for depression that occurs when a person is losing something that made them feel very good, which could have been homosexuality. And we have these vitamins A, C, E, and B6. And of course, selenium. Glutamine is used for control. Melatonin is to help a person sleep. GABA is used for control. DHEA is used to trigger the what we call adrenals, to help a person have more energy and get out of the depressive state. Lysine is to help a person relax and also helps them with their control. And histidine helps with relaxation and helps the person also to sleep at night and helps them cleanse their body. Beta-carotene is, of course, a form of vitamin A. Helps the person cleanse. Now let's look at some of the homosexual treatment detoxification herbs that we use to control behavior here. The herbs we use in this process is the ones in specific would be chickweed, which is good for controlling or appetite suppressing and craving. It could be appetite craving for food and craving for thoughts, craving for spirituality, and craving for sexuality. We use chickweed, we use chamomile or catnip as a calmative. We use kudzu, that's also used for control. St. John's wort is used for depression because people that are trying to detox from homosexuality will get depressed. And we use bilberry for the pancreas, for sugar, for craving. And we use feverfew for the headaches and tension and stress that a person may have. And we use milk thistle to help cleanse the liver, and the liver helps you get enough energy to stabilize your system. So again, we're going to use the chickweed for craving. We can use the catnip and chamomile as a calmative. We're going to use the kudzu for craving, the St. John's wort for depression, the bilberry for craving. fever, for migraine headaches, and strengthen the nervous system, and milk thistle. These are the ones that are the most popularly used. Of course, we also use ginkgo for thinking, and of course echinacea to cleanse the glands, the reproductive glands, and that sort of thing. And the juices, so just as much raw juice as you possibly like. Especially papaya, lemon, raw lemon I'm talking about, not the kind you buy in a bottle. Cherry, burdock root, we juice that. Alfalfa, we juice that. Pineapple juice, raw. Currants, which we put in the juice. You can get dry currants and put it in the juice. We use raw beets, we use kelp, and we use celery. Much raw juice that you possibly like to drink. Now understand that when you're coming off anything that you like, you're going to have a craving. Craving can cause you back into homosexuality. Now that can be social, emotional. You may miss the social atmosphere, the friends you had, the people you socialize with that are homosexual. You miss them, so that can cause a craving, cause you to go have a withdrawal crisis, because you get emotional support from them in your addiction. Then you have biochemical triggers like the drugs, the alcohol, and the white sugar. So all these things can lead you into a withdrawal crisis. Then the person gets depressed, and depression can be accentuated by death, the death of a behavior such as homosexuality, of a lifestyle, of a social atmosphere, of your friends. This can cause depression. That's why we have the St. John's wort. Denial of the addiction and disease. Alternative lifestyle, genetic, don't like opposite sex. People into denial of the addiction. So they say, oh, I just don't like women, or I just don't like men, that sort of thing. That's in a state of denial. And calling it an alternative lifestyle is also a part of denial. Saying it has something to do with the genetic code is also a form of denial. Stressor can cause relapse. These are things that can trigger you to go right back into homosexuality and those type of related behaviors, such as death of someone close to you, a significant other, or some radio or singing star or television star. That can also trigger. You can be out of work, you can have money problems, you can have alcohol abuse or drug abuse, white sugar, and white supremacy. All these things can be a stressor and cause you to relapse into homosexuality. As I said, I'm trying to help us to get a better understanding and deal with homosexuality, and also a better way of helping those who may be trying to get out of this political and social institution of European society. Homosexual withdrawal crisis, as I mentioned before. Now look, you have anxiety, you're nervous, you're upset, you have fear that you won't get better or you can't stop. You have a challenge of heterosexual life. You may not have had a good heterosexual life. You may have not had successful relationships heterosexually, a man and woman type of relationship. So you may be afraid of that challenge again, that you may fail. Or you may fear rejection. You may get angry with yourself, that's self-hatred, and analyze yourself and say, I need to do this and that, and try to bond back with African culture, reclaim your African life. If you do that, you're going to get out of homosexual addiction. You're going to get back to your life. You're going to reclaim it. But if you go into race hatred and analyze the addiction, there's nothing wrong with homosexuality. This is a lifestyle, just a way of living, and people should learn to accept it. You analyze an addiction. That leads you to codependency to European society and European sexuality, because this type of homosexual behavior is derived from European culture. So now you're back to your dependency upon Europeans to solve your problems, define your sexuality. This leads to the death of African culture in you. So you have a choice. Once you get to anxiety, fear, and anger, either you can direct that anger to analyzing yourself or analyzing your addiction. If you analyze your addiction, it's the death of African culture. Just to reiterate what I'm talking about here, homosexual addiction, for treatment, we must bond to African-defined sexuality. That's bonding to our culture. Remember, sex is a political and social institution of a culture. You have to have a culture to have sexuality. You have to have a culture to have a taste, to see, to hear, because these things are defined by your culture. You must have basic needs of spirituality, family, shelter, food, health, and a job met. You have to meet your work needs in order to have a treatment. You must provide personality and sexual adjustment. You have to adjust to this life change, being a full-time heterosexual. The counselor must be at arm's length and not allow homosexual flirting, erotic gestures, or jokes. Abstinence from all homosexual-related activities, friends, and heterosexual intercourse. As I mentioned before, it's difficult to bond to your culture if you have this stressor. You can't avoid all the homosexuals in the world, but you can avoid participating in social activities with them, which can lead to harmfulness to yourself if you are homosexually challenged. African people are homosexually challenged, just as we are melanin challenged, just as we are parental challenged. That's because we are not in full control of our culture in all places, in all times, in all situations. Therefore, we are challenged. The sex response, we have to understand that. The lips of the vagina, the labia majora opens and flattens. The labia minora extends and gets erect-like. Clitoris, nipples, and penis get erect. The breasts swell. This is equally in men and women. The dark area around the nipples gets darker and larger. The vagina gets longer and erect-like. Vaginal shaft I'm talking about. The vagina moves upward and a small cup is formed to hold the sperm at the opening of the uterus. The uterus moves up until it's forward. Now we get to the men. The frenulum that's on the underside of the penis triggers the perineum, prostate, and urethra to pulsate and contract. This triggers what we call the orgasm. And when orgasm is achieved, the skin of the vagina, the labia minora, and the labia majora, and the skin around the penis get dark. Skin gets highly sensitive. This is the sexual response in men and women. And this response is made that way because of the sexual systems of the man and the woman are different. We have to understand this difference. These are the things we want to get back to understanding and utilize in order to find our heterosexual life, which we must redefine when you're coming off of homosexuality or trying to understand homosexuals. It must achieve these states and understand that the hair on the back gets erect when you're responding to sex. As I mentioned before, orgasm, the foreskin darkens and that the vagina darkens. The climax plateau, the clitoris shortens and lifts, it's too sensitive to touch. Vagina contracts, large lips swell. The anus sphincter muscle closes. After play, the close hugging and caressing. And after orgasm, 30 minutes to 1 hour to return to normal. And of course, the area around the nipple gets smaller and the nipples stay big. This is what we're trying to rekindle in the man and in the woman that is trying to either alter their life and get back to African culture once again in a political and social system known as sex. Now, these are some of the beliefs that can deter a person from achieving this, the sexual beliefs of the Europeans. Europeans believe homosexuality is a lifestyle choice. That's false. European seasoning creates African self, mother, father relationship, or black race hatred. The race hatred forms sexual hatred, which forms homosexuality in African people. It is part of the seasoning process that creates homosexuality in Africans. It is not a lifestyle choice. To have a lifestyle choice, you must have life, liberty, be able to pursue your culture in all places, in all times, in all situations, which you cannot do under white domination, white supremacy. Therefore, is a form of domination and race hatred, and therefore hatred of your ability to create each other once again. Homosexuality is psychosocial. This is false. It can be caused by synthetic chemicals, deterioration of corpus colostrum, and cause a smaller bundle of nerves in the hypothalamus. It's a physical condition as well. It's not just a psychosocial condition. It's a physical condition that you can create by oppressing a people or by putting them on certain chemicals. Now, homosexual addiction, excuse me, it's floating a little bit there. Homosexual addiction in recorded history is a practice of European civilization. No recorded incidents have occurred in African civilization until We were invaded by the Europeans, and the men were raped by the French and raped by French women, and that rape of men, white man raping black slave men and white women raping black slave females occurred in Europe and in South America. It's something forced upon us, the molestation of our race and molestation of our sexual system. Homosexual addiction is directly and indirectly a part of European heterosexual activities. As I mentioned before, the height of masculinity in European civilization is femininity. That's why they changed their names. The Pope changed his name to a female's name. Sam is a female's name. That's why you call America Uncle Sam, because a man changes his name to a woman's name, because the height of male sexuality is to be gay, as they call it, the Europeans. The Europeans have the word gay and lesbian. The Africans don't have a term for that behavior. Social conditions or social engineering creates homosexuality. We have homosexual books in elementary school. I have 2 mommies. I'm so lucky I have 2 daddies. We have homosexual themes in the movies, on television shows, the unisexual, homosexual clothes. We have homosexual organizations. They even have homosexual schools, elementary schools and high schools in America. Homosexual addiction is a sign and symptom of European-caused slavery trauma, cultural stress, population control. It's used to control the population by getting men to mate with men and women to mate with women. It decreases the population. It causes dysfunctional genders, dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional families. It's part of Africans trying to be accepted by whites by using white sexuality or homosexuality. It's a part of African self-hatred. It's a part of codependent on white psychosis known as white supremacy. We want to be hated and controlled by whites, so we practice homosexuality. Homosexuality is a disease for Africans, but normal for Europeans. Trying to reiterate this and let you understand in commercials, as I mentioned before, like the donuts and the hot dogs and the hamburgers, how they use what we call the face itself to stimulate homosexuality and sexuality in us. The nose is close to the eyes. That means there's a long vaginal shaft or long penis. The nose is far from the eyes. There's a short vaginal shaft and short penis. I'm talking about the distance of the nose from the eyes. Narrow cheeks or jaw indicates small sex organs. Deep lines at the mouth. Strong sex feelings. Few lashes on the lower eyelid. Mild sex feelings, few hairs and or small amount of hair around the sex organs, sexual control, a wet mouth while talking, that means you're easily aroused. The tongue is associated with the clitoris and the penis. That's why the Europeans use tongue kissing. The man is pretending he's sucking on another man's penis, while the white woman's pretending she's sucking on another woman's clitoris. That's why they do the tongue kissing. That's why they use the nose and the lipsticks and all the parts of the face to cause sexual arousing. Your body and sex. Again, a small mouth, small vagina, or small penis. Long fingers, long shaft of the vagina, or long penis. White women artists have a tendency to draw black men's fingers long, and white men tend to draw black men's fingers short because of this association with the penis. Big lips, large lips to the labia, to the vagina. Bulging eyes, small penis, small vagina. Deep set eyes, long penis, long shaft of vagina. Now you see why certain actors who have deep set eyes, like Tom Cruise and all those type people, are sexy to white people, because their eyes sit back deep, so they associate that with a long penis. It's used all the time in marketing for television programs and movies. Thick eyelids, short shaft vagina and penis. Thin eyelids, long shaft of vagina and penis. Thick wide lips, thick penis, that's girth, and thick lips on the vagina. That's why the white women are getting their lips enlarged. They know the association of the face to the sex organs. The thumb indicates penis size or vagina size. The wrist to the tip of the index finger indicates the erect penis. So now we see some of the associations of the body with the sex organs, and we can begin to start understanding why they're used so much in European movies and symbolism with the food, and give me 5 and all that sort of symbolism that's used. your body and sex. Now, the female sex organs are inside the body, which is an earth element, and they're close together, and they move from east to west, the fallopian tubes. The male sex organs are outside the body, the testicles, and inside, of course, the prostate. That's the air element, and they're far apart. And the testicles, of course, move south to north. You see that the male and female body is made to complement each other. One is moving north to south, the other is moving east to west. But we go in conflict of all of this when we go into homosexuality. We have to have certain beliefs. Remember, sex is a social and political system of a culture used to express the culture, used to answer the culture's questions, solve the culture's problems, and further create those type of individuals needed to cause the culture to uplift itself. Now here's some of the false beliefs. Surgery and chemicals can change your sex and redefine your sexuality. It's true, surgical and chemical sex organ mutilation cannot redefine your sexual gender. By getting your penis cut off and shaped into a vagina does not make you a woman. Taking a lot of hormones to cause your breasts to shrink and get hair on your face does not make you a man. Chemicals and surgery cannot redefine your sexual gender. That's just a belief of European culture. A male and female that follows the sexual behavior of another gender becomes that gender. A man and a man masturbating each other do not become a gender known as homosexual. They can only become human masturbators of each other. They do not create a gender by masturbating each other, creating a gender called homosexuality. That's in European logic. It's true in African logic. We say a monkey cannot follow the sexual practice of a lion and then call himself a lion. This is African logic. If a monkey follows the practices of a lion, the monkey does not call itself a lion, and it cannot become a lion. But when you're into the logic system of the Europeans, two men masturbating themselves, or two women masturbating themselves, create another gender called homosexuality. That's European logic, not African logic. A woman's breast, or the cleavage, the part between her two breasts, are sexually erotic. That is not true in African culture. The Europeans, it's true the Europeans associate the cleavage of the buttocks with the cleavage of the breast. That's why the breast is sexually exciting to the Europeans. The behind, the buttocks are sexually erotic. The buttocks pass manure out of them. There's nothing erotic about watching someone's behind have a bowel movement or pass gas. This is European thinking. Absurd. The buttocks are associated with male homosexuality. That's true. That's what it's all about. It's association with sexual activities of men putting their penis in another man's behind and having sex with their bowel movement. That's what it's associated with. But in no way is that erotic to African people. You have to be into another cultural, social system and political system in order to be aroused by their sexual activities. Let's look at some more of those sexual beliefs. Okay. Sex drive. The Europeans tell you you have a sex drive. No animals have a sex drive. Birds, bees, fish, trees, plants of any sort have a sex drive. It is true they have a reproductive drive. When they have sexual intercourse, they are reproducing. In the case of African people, we either regenerate or reproduce by sexual activity. Regeneration is when the man doesn't ejaculate. He uses that sexual climax energy, let it go up his spinal column up to his pineal gland. The lady does the same thing, and we call it sexual regeneration. Or we use sexual reproduction, as that's when the man ejaculates. But we do not have a sex drive. No plants, no animals, insects have a sex drive. When they have sexual intercourse, it's either reproduction or no sexual intercourse at all. Genetic possibility for disease is normal and healthy. That's false. Genetic possibility for a disease is true, but you don't have a possibility for a disease and call that normal. You can't have a possibility to grow feathers or be a homosexual and say that's normal, healthy. That's just a possibility. Nature is a non-cultural scientific term. That is not true. Nature is a political and social term of a culture. Whatever culture you're in defines what nature is. I went over that earlier about the Twa and the New people. Sexual belief, evolution. By having this homosexual activity, you evolve into becoming a homosexual. You cannot evolve. You're born limited. If you're born a man, you're limited to a man's physique, a man's hormones and all that. You can adapt yourself to situations, but you cannot evolve into a situation. Opposites attract. The man attracted to the woman means one is opposite in sexuality. Opposites attract. That's a European belief. Balance attract. The man is attracted to the woman means that both seek harmony and balance, which we call ma'at. Ma'at causes attraction. The belief, false, homosexuality. It is true they are homo-masturbators or anti-sexuals, but they cannot create another sex by masturbating each other. Same-sex intercourse. That is false. Only a female and a male have sexual intercourse. Only a female and a male can have sexual intercourse. The same sex can only masturbate each other. They cannot have sexual intercourse. See, the sexuality is defined by the culture that you're in. Let me go back and show you this holistic chart so you can see a little bit about the way this is played into the body. This is the holistic chart. Now look, I'm going to show you the colors here. Now, we're just looking at the colors. Now, understand when they're associated with glands, the solar plexus associated with yellow, the genitals with orange, and the colon, rectum is associated with reds. So down the bottom we have the male colors, yellow, orange, and red, which we associate with Ra, R-A, the sun god, those bright colors of the sun. And if you've noticed insects or birds or other animals, you notice that the male is always the one with the brightest colors, the bright colors, whereas the woman has those earth colors, the heavenly colors. So we have the female colors, indigo, violet, and blue. Now if you put yellow with blue, you get green, so green is in the middle here. I repeat, the male colors are red, orange, and yellow. The female colors are blue, violet, and indigo. So if I were to put white paint and mix that in with red paint, I would get pink. Pink is derived from red, so pink should go on the boy, and blue should go on the girl, because blue is a female color. But the Europeans define color according to their culture, and their attempt to make the woman mate with the man was to put the pink on the man, you see. Put the pink on the woman so the man would be attracted to the woman. Again, he's attracted to another man, that's why they're using the pink. The woman is dressing up as a homosexual again in European culture, that's why they put the pink on the girl and the blue on the boy. Coming out of that homosexual themes in their culture, the Greeks and the Romans. Again, I'm just trying to reiterate that culture defines sexuality. Sexuality is a part of a culture. It's a political and social system of a culture. I just want to show you the differences that are in your head, in your brain here. The frontal lobe, more women focus their language skills in the frontal lobe, this area here of the brain, while men focus their language skills in the parietal lobe of the brain. Now, if these nerves here, in this bundle here, connecting the right and left hemisphere, the right part and the left part of your brain, which we call the right side, the male principle, and the left side, the female principle. If those nerves, if in this area starts crenating, it has a lot of melanin in African people, and it's very large, but it's smaller than Europeans. Now down here, when they're talking about the corpus callosum, it's often wider in the brains of women than in those of men. It may allow for greater crosstalk between hemispheres, which occurs in African people. Now, we have more communication between the male and female principle, therefore we're more in harmony with each other, so the conflict biologically cannot occur between the sexes. The Europeans have a battle of the sexes. Africans have harmony, ma'at, of the sexes. Now we're into the hypothalamus right here. It's associated with sexual behavior. A group of neurons in the anterior hypothalamus was found to be larger in heterosexual men than in women or homosexual men. So you can see that the wiring here can be physically altered by chemicals and cause this homosexual behavior, but it doesn't alter the fact that you have a man's brain or a woman's brain. You can alter and bend nature, but you cannot redefine nature. So, I gave you a brief overview of homosexuality and trying to get a better understanding of it, because we have to deal with this in our community. We have to cope with this. We have to understand it. It's in our families, our cousins, one of our brothers or sisters, or someone we know is directly involved in it or indirectly involved in it, or socializing with someone like that on a job or in school, in a workplace, or at parties, or at events, or at the church, or at the mosque, or at the synagogue. So we're always in contact with it, so we need to get a better understanding of it and know that our race is homosexually challenged. And there will be many people who will continue to be homosexual in our village. It's not something that's going to go away any more than drug addiction, any more than crack, any more than black-on-black crime, as they call it, the violence between men and women, the divorces that go on. All of these are signs and symptoms of white supremacy. Until we get rid of white supremacy, white domination, homosexuality will always exist. Violence between men and women will always exist. Divorces will exist. Dysfunctional families, dysfunctional leaders, and dysfunctional sexuality will exist. The objective is to understand that we have a political and social institution which we call a culture, and our culture is not healthy until we rid ourselves of all those things that cause us to be dysfunctional. We have to practice our culture in all places, in all times, in all situations. In order to do that, we have to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In order to have that, we must have a military to protect us and to attack our enemies. Without that, we cannot have a functional culture. So we must get back to a functional culture. We must get rid of white supremacy in order to get rid of the symptom of white supremacy known as homosexuality. We should be kind to one another, because we've all been damaged by white supremacy in some way. Directly or indirectly, we have been damaged by it in our relationships, how we relate to men relating to women, men relating to men, women relating to women. And we cannot solve that dysfunction with homosexuality. We have to attack this thing head on. It is white supremacy that we need to focus on. And it's not homosexuality. And this is just one of the elements involved in our village crisis, which is a cultural stressor that we have to solve to liberate Africa and to liberate African people all over the world.